genetically enhanced superhumans, life-saving whales, and a search for God. The crews of the Enterprise have experienced a lot, but which movie stands above the rest? The answer awaits. Helmed by William Shatner, Star Trek V: The Final Frontier has a few interesting ideas about religious fanaticism. Unfortunately, as the film's director, Shatner didn't quite nail the central metaphor. It takes over 45 minutes for the story to go anywhere, and there are elaborate sequences that revolve around just a few unfunny one-liners.
Hi, Bones! Mind if we drop in for dinner?
The opening, in which Kirk, Spock, and McCoy scale a mountain and sing campfire songs, immediately dulls the film's pacing. The Final Frontier also has one of the worst villains in the series. Spock's half-brother Sybok, who conveniently hadn't been mentioned at all in any of the episodes focusing on Spock's origins, was a potentially interesting parallel to the rise of televangelism. Unfortunately, Shatner had no real insights, and Lawrence Luckinbill's performance failed to create any tension. While there are moments in The Final Frontier that are so campy and over the top that they're unintentionally funny, the majority of the film is simply uninspired. The Next Generation cast had both the benefit and the disadvantage of moving to the big screen after their story had been completed on television. Unlike the original series, which was cut short in its prime, The Next Generation had developed each of its characters well throughout a 7-season run. Unfortunately, this dynamic was never fully captured cinematically. The Next Generation was more of an ensemble show than the original series, which tended to mostly focus on Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. While this made The Next Generation a stronger, prolonged television show, balancing a larger cast was harder to do within the 2-hour window of a film. Insurrection is the lowest point in the Next Generation cast films. The metaphor of a fountain of youth planet and the conflicts it causes with the Prime Directive had already been done better on the show. Insurrection barely progresses any of the characters, who all appear as caricatures of their more developed personalities. In particular, forcing Captain Picard and Data into a dynamic reminiscent of Kirk and Spock contradicted their depiction on the show. Although the film's budget was significantly higher, the action was uninspired. Director Jonathan Frakes attempted a more lighthearted tone, reminiscent of the Voyage home, but the attempts at humor were awkward and unfunny. After the slowly paced Insurrection, the franchise went in the opposite direction for the next film. Stuart Baird, who had helmed the Fugitive sequel, U.S. Marshals, was brought in to direct an action-packed adventure. While action is certainly an important part of Star Trek, Nemesis had no substance to back up the spectacle. Like many of the unsuccessful Star Trek films, Nemesis had a good idea in theory, but it botches the execution. The film's core antagonist, Praetor Shinzon, is a leader of the Riemann people. He's also a younger clone of Picard, created by the Romulans to negotiate with the Federation. This could have been a fascinating exploration into Picard's psychology, where he's faced with a villainous mirror of his younger self and forced to think back on his mistakes. However, all Nemesis does is feature Hardy doing a bad Patrick Stewart impression. Nemesis also has an incredibly awkward sequence in which Shinzon violates the mind of Counselor Deanna Troi, a sexual assault parallel that is just uncomfortable to watch. At the very least, Baird does create a few compelling set pieces. While Generations isn't as boring as Insurrection or as overblown as Nemesis, the first incarnation of the Next Generation crew on the big screen is a major misstep that fundamentally did not understand the appeal of the landmark sequel series. Beloved characters who have been well developed throughout the show's run are largely relegated to the background, in an installment that tries to turn Picard into an action hero. Compared to the well-reasoned, intelligent ship captain that he is in the series, Picard appears in Generations as a brash and reckless character. It was an attempt to force Stewart into Shatner's shoes, even though they play radically different characters. The concept of the two captains working together was an exciting possibility, but Kirk overstays his welcome, taking away narrative focus from the Next Generation crew. His presence is also awkward, given the proper send-off he received in the Undiscovered country, and his meeting with Picard himself is massively underwhelming. At the very least, the opening scene where Kirk takes control of the USS Enterprise B shows a more mature version of the iconic ship captain. This is contradicted in the film's ending, however, which disrespects the character's legacy.
You're a Starfleet officer. You have a duty.
I don't need to be lectured by you. I was out saving the galaxy when your grandfather was in diapers.
Demonized by fans as a poor-taste remake of The Wrath of Khan, the second film in the Kelvin Timeline trilogy has a lot more merit than it's given credit for. Star Trek Into Darkness wrestles with interesting ideas about the forced militarization of Starfleet and the parallels with recent events in American history. using legacy Starfleet leaders' forced attempts to provoke a war with the Klingon Empire works as a nuanced metaphor for the Bush administration's militarization. It identified how a terrorist attack can galvanize the public into supporting radical action. This clever way of modernizing the series comes in sharp contrast to its frequent callbacks to the past, including the reuse of entire sequences, lines of dialogue, and iconic moments from The Wrath of Khan. The Kelvin timeline crew hadn't yet matured into their roles in the same way that their original series counterparts had, so it didn't make sense for Kirk to make the ultimate sacrifice that Spock did. Benedict Cumberbatch delivers an excellent and menacing performance that would have ranked among the best Star Trek cinematic villains if he was simply John Harrison. Turning him into Ricardo Montalban's Khan was completely unnecessary. The film's chaotic third act features some of the greatest Star Trek action ever, but it introduces a super-blood plotline that is confusing and lazily wraps up story beats.
Once we caught him, I synthesized the serum from his super blood. Tell me, are you feeling homicidal, power mad, despotic?
After the success of Star Wars, it made sense that audiences would turn out to see the Star Trek crew on the big screen for an action-packed adventure. Star Trek the Motion Picture is not that at all. The philosophical exploration of identity, over-reliance on technology, and faith in institutions were much closer to the artsier sci-fi fare of 2001: A Space Odyssey or Solaris. Not only was it radically different from the spectacle of Star Wars, but the more mature direction of the motion picture wasn't anything like the original series itself. The result is a fascinating combination of heady science fiction themes and a fan-pleasing reunion of the original series cast. Kirk still shows signs of the brash captain he was in his younger years, but as an admiral, he's saddled with more responsibility. Spock's reintroduction to his old colleagues after spending time studying his people's culture on his homeworld is thoughtfully handled. Unfortunately, the methodical pacing and reliance on spectacle haven't aged well. Laborious time is entirely dedicated to depicting the visual effects in prolonged space sequences. The search for Spock had to deal with a challenging concept. Spock needed to be brought back from the dead so the series could continue, but he couldn't be easily reintroduced in a way that negated the emotionally devastating moments of The Wrath of Khan. Thankfully, the search for Spock accomplished this by showing the great personal cost it takes for both Kirk and the crew. Shatner is often lampooned for his over-the-top performances, but he shows surprising dramatic range as Kirk wrestles with the death of his lifelong friend. Not to mention, his shock upon losing his son David is devastating. His later decision to sacrifice the USS Enterprise to save Spock is a beautiful piece of symmetrical storytelling. In The Wrath of Khan, Spock sacrificed himself to save his ship, and now the ship was returning the favor. These weightier themes are wrapped up in a fun adventure, where the crew steals back the Enterprise from Starfleet authorities. Unfortunately, a lot of the action has aged rather poorly, particularly Kirk's hand-to-hand fight with the Klingon Krug, one of the hammiest villains in the series. After the divisive response to Star Trek Into Darkness, and the more action-centric direction of the Kelvin timeline series, the third installment scaled things back for a more contained sci-fi adventure. Chris Pine had matured into the role of Kirk beyond his more eccentric depiction in the previous two films, and here he both wrestles with his father's legacy and considers what life beyond the captain's chair would look like. Star Trek Beyond masterfully divides the crew and gives each character a moment to shine. After a stunning sequence in which the alien leader Krall attacks the Enterprise, forcing the ship to crash onto a mysterious jungle planet, the crew is paired off as they search for Krall's base. Seeing Bones and Spock interact works very well, as the pair share some great humorous banter. There's also time made for more serious moments that thoughtfully honor the passing of Leonard Nimoy. Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country was released amidst the end of the Cold War, a time in which the United States was reaching a peace agreement with the Soviet Union. In the film, the Federation and the Klingon Empire are doing the same thing. Kirk is framed for the murder of the Klingon Chancellor, which threatens to disrupt the fragile political state. Not only was The Undiscovered Country a thoughtful examination of the political climate at the time, but it also served as a proper send-off for the cast. Kirk questions what his place is as an older man, and director Nicholas Meyer makes the more dialogue-centric scenes just as compelling as the action. The Shakespeare-obsessed Klingon military leader Chang is one of the best villains in the series, and Christopher Plummer's actual love of Shakespeare translates well.
To be or not to be? That is the question which preoccupies our people, Captain Kirk.
The thought of anyone but the original cast taking on the original series seemed unthinkable. and a prequel threatened to add further complications to the mythology. However, J.J. Abrams found a creative way to introduce an alternate timeline set in the Kelvin universe, and he even brought Leonard Nimoy back as the elder Spock Prime, who becomes Kirk's mentor. 2009's Star Trek does a great job of giving every character equal screen time, but the heart of the story is the relationship between Kirk and Spock. It's fascinating to see how the adversarial relationship transforms into a friendship, and Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto honor their predecessors without simply impersonating them. This film has one of the best opening sequences in the franchise, which establishes how Kirk's father left a lasting legacy for his son to uphold. Unfortunately, Star Trek does lose some points for its underwhelming villain, Captain Nero. Star Trek First Contact is perhaps the most action-packed installment in the entire series, but as a director, Jonathan Frakes was able to use his knowledge of the cast dynamics to give each character an interesting personal journey. The film is particularly strong in how it uses Picard's post-traumatic stress disorder as he's reunited with the enemy that once held him captive, the Borg. Alice Krige delivers a commanding performance as the enigmatic Borg Queen, who forces Data to question his humanity. The film has that classic Star Trek optimism through the inspirational storyline of Dr. Zefram Cochrane, the scientist who bridges communication between humankind and the Vulcan visitors. It's both heartwarming and amusing to see him learn about the legacy of his achievements when he meets with Riker, Troy, and Geordi. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is the most comedic entry in the series.
Hey, watch where you're going, you dumbass!
Well, a double dumbass on you!
While the premise of capturing the sound of whales, which have become extinct in the future, to destroy an alien probe is ridiculous, The Voyage Home treats the importance of animal rights with earnestness. There's a lot of great self-aware humor that pokes fun at the cliches of Federation procedures, including a hilarious sequence where Spock dispatches a rowdy bus passenger. It also has one of the most satisfying endings of any film in the series. Kirk is praised for his heroism, yet he's demoted from Admiral back into the captain's chair. It was a great conclusion to the story arc of the Wrath of Khan and the search for Spock, setting the crew up for further adventures. Sometimes the obvious pick is also the correct one. Such is the case with the Wrath of Khan. Director Nicholas Meyer understood that the crew had grown since they appeared in the original series, and he crafted a story about characters wrestling with age and their past mistakes. Meyer also orchestrated tense combat sequences between ships that are reminiscent of submarine battles. Ricardo Montalban's villainous Khan from the classic episode Space Seed returns to remind Kirk that the past never truly dies. His scenery-chewing performance easily ranks as the greatest Star Trek villain ever. It's impossible to talk about the Wrath of Khan without discussing Spock's apparent death. It's a tear-jerking, iconic moment for any hardcore Star Trek fan.
I have been, and always shall be, your friend.